Hey everyone, today we are diving into one of the coolest visual tools in Roblox Studio, the Particle Emitter. It can be used to make fire, smoke, lightning, and all kind of awesome effects for your game. In the first part of the video, we'll go over how to use the Particle Emitter, and after that, we'll go over the examples you see here. Well, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we're going to add a block part to our workspace. So let's go up here to Part, click on Block. All right, so once we have that added, let's make sure you have that part selected. And we're going to go over to the workspace, find that part in the workspace. And if you move your mouse cursor over that part, you're going to get a little plus next there. Click on the plus. And then we want to type in P so we can help us find the particle emitter. Select the particle emitter to add it to the part. So once the particle emitter is added to the part, you'll start seeing these particles being emitted from the particle emitter. Okay, let's start going through the various properties of the particle emitter. So the very first property we'll see here is the color property. All right, let's go to the color property and just click on the little white square here. And that's going to give us the color selector. So we can select any color we want here. Let's say change it to blue. Click OK, and now our particle is now blue. But you can do a lot more than just select one single color. So go back to the color property here. And you see there's these three little dots set up here once you have the color property selected. So click on the three dots. And then you'll see this color emitter dialog open here with kind of like a timeline of the color. So you can have the particle color change over time depending on how long the particle has been in existence. So right now we have this one single color. But say, for example, after a second or so, we want that color to change. You can just go up here and click in this little box with the single blue color here. And it's going to add a little rectangle here. So then with this rectangle selected, go down to here, and now we can change this, say, to another color. Let's change it to purple. Click OK. And you'll see that at the very bottom here, it's initially blue, but as the time goes on, it changes to purple. If you wanted it to stay blue longer, go back in here. You find this little triangle, and let's drag it over. Right, so now you see that it's actually blue a little longer. So in here, you can add as many colors as you want. So let's add in a few more. So we're going to click on here to add another triangle appear here. All right, so we're going to change this one to green. We're going to add another one over here. Change this one to reddy orange. All right, so now this is what we end up with. We have a color changing over time as that particle exists to the various different colors we selected. Okay, for now, I'm just going to reset this. We'll go back to just the blue color for now. All right, back in our properties, you'll see right below color, you have light emission. So this is basically kind of makes the particle have this glowing effect. It's emitting light. So 0, it's not emitting any light. And you can go increase that all the way up to 1. And then you're going to get like this glowing particle here. So if you want it glowing a little bit less, you can say reduce that, say, to like a 0.5. Gives a nice kind of glowing effect there. Below that, you have light influence. So light influence is how light within your game impacts the particle itself. All right, so then for orientation, you have a few different options there. So you'll click on that. You'll say facing camera world up, velocity parallel, velocity perpendicular. So we're going to just leave it at facing camera for now. So then below that, you got size. So this is the actual size of the individual particle itself. So let's increase that, say, to 2, and you'll see the particle increase in size to 2. So I believe that's in studs. Okay, we're going to change that back to 1. All right, so this next one below that is squash. So let's say you want to squish that particle and give it a little different look. For example, here, let's squish the particle. So it's going to increase this to 1. So now it's squished. You can see it's kind of squished in a little bit there. So 0, it's not squished at all. 1, it's squished. So if you want to squish it more, you can just increase that value. So let's increase it to 2. So now it's even squished even more. Right, so then again, you'll notice with the squash and the size, you have that 3 dots. So you can click on that. And again, over the time of the existence of the particle, you can change how much it's squished or the size of that particle over time. So if I want to change how much squished at the very beginning of its existence, I'd come over here to the very left and I adjust this value here depending how much I want to be squished. So for example, here I can drag this down here. Now we're at the value is close to 0, so it's not really squished at all. But then later on, as that particle exists longer, it's being squished. So for example, here we can increase that up higher, and then it's going to squish it more the longer that particle exists. You can see at the very top here, it has more squishing, and then below here, it's basically not squished at all. So we're going to reset this back. And let's change the squish back to 0. All right, so now we have texture. So texture is basically the appearance of the particle itself. So right now we have the default texture for the particle emitter, which is just that very kind of generic particle. There is particle packs you can get from the store. which will give you a large variety of particles you can select from. For example, like fire particles or some other various different type of particles. So to get that particle pack, you just go to the creator store, start typing in particle, and then usually have particle pack will pop up there, so you can select particle pack. And there's lots of different options here. So let's grab this one here. All right, so this is the particle pack added to our workspace here. So you can see all the different particles in the particle pack. So there's a large variety of ones here, some interesting ones for fire and some other various different types of effects here. So to use one of the particles, have the select tool selected, and then basically go over and find the particle that you want to use, select it. And then you're going to have a decal here, and we want to grab the texture ID from the texture. So we're just going to go down to the texture property for the decal, and then you just want to copy that. And then you're going to want to go back and select your particle emitter, go to the texture property, and then just paste in the value for the texture particle you want to use. So now we have the star-shaped particle now that we've changed the texture. All right, then texture. Below texture, we have transparency. So transparency is whether you can see through the particle or not, whether you can see it or not. So if it's 0, it's not transparent at all. And the closer you get to 1, the more transparent it is. So if we set the transparency to 1, we're not going to be able to see any of the particles because they'll be basically invisible because they're completely transparent. And then say we set it to 0.5. So it's going to be partially transparent. We can still see the particle, but it has a little bit of transparency. The next property we're going to look at is emission direction. So right now we have the emission direction set to top. So the particles are coming out of the top of the part. I'm just going to move this part up a bit here. Now we're going to change the emission direction to bottom. So let's select bottom. And now you see it'll have the particles coming out of the bottom of the part. So if, say, for example, you wanted to make some rain or something like that, you could probably use bottom. You'd want to have those particles falling down. Let's try out a few of the other emission directions here. So let's go left, right, front, back. So a pretty straightforward kind of concept, just basically the direction those particles are emitting from the emitter. Change it back to top. All right, so below emission direction, we have enabled. So that's basically just turning your particles on and off. So if you wanted to control your particle emitter in a script and you want to be able to turn it on and off, you would use the enabled property for that. So right now it's on. Check this, and then the particles stop emitting. Turn it back on with a check. There you go. We got the particles back again. Next property is lifetime. So lifetime is how long the particle exists for. So you can set a range. So you get a random range, so a minimum value and a maximum value. So right now it has a minimum of 5 seconds and a maximum of 10 seconds. So a particle will exist for up between 5 and 10 seconds. And it'd be like a random value associated to each particle. So if you wanted them to exist for a lower period of time, you would reduce the maximum value. Say, for example, you want this only to 2 seconds. So now we have a minimum value of 2 seconds and a maximum value of 2 seconds. So those particles are going to exist for 2 seconds. If you wanted to make that a little more random, then again, we would adjust the minimum value. Let's change this to 1. So now the particle exists between 1 and 2 seconds. All right, so I just changed the default values back for 5 for the minimum value and 10 for the maximum value. So the next property below lifetime is rate. So rate is the number of particles per second that are going to be emitted from the particle emitter. So right now we have it set to 20, but let's reduce that down to just 2. And now we're only getting 2 particles per second emitted from the emitter. So the next property below rate is rotation, and you got below that rot speed. So you can expand rotation, and you're going to have a minimum maximum values. So the rotation property is the initial rotation angle of the particle when it gets emitted. And below that, the rotation speed is for how fast that particle is rotating. So we're going to change the rotation to min value of 0, and we're going to change the max to 90. So each particle now will have an initial different rotation angle. So now let's set the rotation speed by setting the rot speed. So we're going to set the max to 50, and let's set the minimum to 10. So the rot speed is degrees per second. So these can be rotating up to a maximum rotation of 50 degrees per second. Okay, so now let's look at the speed property. So again, with speed, you can have a minimum maximum value. So speed is how fast the particle is moving itself. And that value is studs per second. So right now we have a speed minimum of 5 and a maximum of 5. So it's going to be moving at 5 studs per second. So let's change this up. Let's increase the max to 50. We're going to change the minimum to 20. So now you see that speed that particle is moving at a lot higher speed than it was previously. Okay, I'm just going to change that back to the default value of 5. And I'm going to increase the rate back up to a higher value. So let's increase it up to 20 again. And now we're going to look at the spread angle. So let's expand the spread angle property. You can have a spread angle on X or on Y. So the spread angle is going to be how particles are distributed along that axis. So the X-axis or the Y-axis. So let's go here. Let's go and change Y to 90. Right, so you can see the spread angle is now 90 degrees. So it's now particles are spreading across 90 degrees of the Y-axis. So you can do the same thing for X also. So let's just change that to 90 also. So now we have 90 on the X and 90 on the Y. So you've got particles kind of flying all over the place right now. All right, we're going to change the back to 0 for each of those. Okay, so now we're back to the default for the spread angle. We have our particles just going straight, flowing straight up. There's 0 set for the spread angle for X and for Y. All right, so now we're going to look at the shape property. So this is the shape that the particles are emitting it from. So default is the box shape, but there's a few different options here. You can have a cylinder, disc, or sphere. So for example, here, if I select sphere, you're going to have particles emitting from all different directions because it's emitting like from a sphere. All right, let's change that back to box. So the next property below shape is shape in out. And that's just basically whether your particles are emitting outward or inward. So default, we have outward here. You can also have them inward or both in and outward. So let's go inward here. They kind of emit inward or outward. All right, and then below shape in and out, you have shape style. So that's if it's emitting from the volume of the part. And the options you have from shape style are volume or surface. So you can either have them emitting from the surface of the part or the whole entire volume of the part. So the next property we have is acceleration. So acceleration is as the particle exists over time, you're having acceleration added to that particle. So the particle speed up over time. So for example, here, let's go to X and we'll type in 10. So now with 10 in X for acceleration, we're having some acceleration added on the X-axis to those particles. So we're seeing those particles speed up over time. So we're speeding up at a rate of 10 studs per second. So that's quite quick for acceleration. Let's just reduce this a bit. Let's sort of change this to 2. So then you'll see the parts remain slower initially, and then again, they'll speed up over time. So you can kind of see how it has this shape kind of appearing. Almost looks like the particles are blowing in the wind. So for example, say if you had like a chimney and you're using a particle effect for some smoke or something like that, this might be a good idea to add some acceleration to those particles. So you have to see that it looks like the smoke is kind of being blown in the wind. Okay, we're going to remove that acceleration and set it back to 0. And the last thing we're going to look at is drag. So drag slows down a particle's velocity over time. So it's kind of just like friction on that particle. So we have drag currently set to 0, but let's just set this to 5. You'll see there's a lot of drag here now. Those particles cannot move very far. They're being stuck in place because the drag is holding them in place. That's a lot of drag, so let's reduce this to 1. All right, so now you see with the drag at 1, those particles are still kind of making a little distance, but the drag is building up over time, and then they're kind of getting stuck up there a little bit higher up. Then you can reduce that. You can make that a decimal value as well. So let's say 0.1. Let's try 0.3. Right, so this is with 0.3. You see the drag is slowly building up. So up here, it kind of catches up on the particle here, and it can't make it much further because that drag is just too much for that particle to get anywhere. Okay, so that's all we're going to cover for the various different properties on a particle emitter. So let's go look at some examples. All right, so let's take a look at these examples here. So the first one is just a standard particle emitter with none of the properties changed. So it's exactly how it is when you add it to a part. The second one is the particle emitter with the same default particle, some small adjustments to give this nice beam effect. So let's go take a look at that one here. All right, so look over at the properties that changed. So to make this one, the property change, we have a color sequence set. So we're just setting some various different colors here to give that kind of multicolor beam effect. We have the light emission jacked up to 1 to give it a glow. We have the size of the particle set to 2, so that makes the part a little larger. Then we have that squashed with 8, that kind of stretches it out, and that's what really gives it that beam effect. So if I set this down to 1, you're going to see it doesn't have as much of the effect. But then you go back to 8, it's got that nice beam look when it's up to 8. Right, then we said it's the same default part texture. We didn't change the texture. Didn't touch transparency. Speed is at 5. That's about it. Yeah, so it's really simple. It's just basically you're swishing that, and it's a little larger, and we've got the color, and that's what gives that nice little beam effect. So the next 3 here, so take a look at these 3. So these are all from the textures for the particle, or from that particle pack. So let's actually go and look at that. So you have this nice little kind of crescent one here. And then we got a flame, and then we got a pot here with some kind of steam kind of boiling up from the pot. Okay, so this is the particle pack. So I believe I grabbed this one right here. So this is the one I used for the flame. And then you can see these crescents down here. So I grabbed, I believe it was this one here for the first one with a little blue rod there. And then for the smoke or steam coming off that pot, I used, I believe it was this one here. So you could use a lot of different ones. You could even use this, depending how you want your kind of steam to look. Okay, so let's select this blue rod one here. So what I did with this is basically just set the color of the block itself, stretched the block to make it look like a rod, and then colored it, setting the color to electric blue. Then we go into the particle emitters. We've set a bunch of different properties on the particle to give it this kind of spirally effect here with that crescent. So we have the light emission jacked up to 0.8. The color is just a single color selected. It's a lighter blue. The size is 0.8, so we want to shrink that particle down a little bit, and we got it squashed a little bit also with a 0.2 in the squash. There is a texture ID that we used that was from that particle pack. Transparency is dropped to 0.5 to give it a little kind of a transparent look there. All right, if you have the lifetime set to from 0.25 to 0.4, so that's so it doesn't go too far up there, it kind of stays just in the where the rod is there. And then to give it that kind of spirally effect, we have the rotation from 0 to 180 for the initial angle of the rotation, and then we have rotation speed from negative 360 up to 360. And then the speed itself, 3 to 4. Spread angle, we have 90 on the X, and the emitter shape is a disk. All right, so the next one we have is our fire effect. So that one, the color is just white. It's getting the color from the texture itself. Light emission is set down to 0. This one really doesn't have that much to it. It's basically the texture itself that's giving it the look. Transparency set to 0.5. We have the lifetime set to 0.75, so it kind of just stays that little kind of ball itself. So it keeps itself with kind of like this little ball of fire. Rate is jacked up to 43. And then we have the rotation from 0 up to 360. Rotation speed is 0 to 40. Speed is set to 5. Emitter shape, we're just using the box itself. And we have a drag set to 0.25 to just kind of keep it all in place there. All right, so for the steam on the cooking pot, just have it set to this kind of ugly green color here on the particle emitter. Light emission, we didn't change that, set to 0. Size, we sized it down a little bit, it's 0.75. It's not squashed. Using the texture from the particle pack. Lifetime is 0.5 because we don't want it to go too high above the pot. It's just kind of steaming just above the pot. All right, so I got the speed set at 2.5. Emitter, it's just the box, nothing too exciting there. But yeah, it's a simple little effect, just a little steam kind of steaming above the pot there. All right, so this last one here, this is just raining cats and dogs. So this one we have 2 particle emitters. So one particle emitter is for the dog, one is for the cat. So for the particle emitters for the texture, I just used a PNG image of the dog and the cat for the texture. So nothing really too fancy here. We got the spread angle adjusted here. So we have on the X, we have a 10, and the Y, we have at 45. And since we want a raining look, we have the emission direction set to bottom, so they're kind of falling down from the cloud itself. All right, all right, that's it for the examples. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. You can have a lot of fun with the particle emitter. You can just play around those properties, try out different textures, and there's a large variety of effects you'll be able to make with your game with the particle emitter. All right, thanks. Thanks for watching, and subscribe. That'd be great.